Welcome to Revenge Diaries, where real stories hit different. From wild heartbreaks and real-life drama to crazy true crime and unsolved mysteries, every drop's got that raw, real vibe. We talk truth, betrayal, justice, and that sweet payback energy. So hit that subscribe and lock in, because this is where truth, revenge, and redemption all crash together. Hey, before we dive in, let me say this straight. What we're about to tell you isn't a made-up story. This isn't fiction. This is one of the real, raw moments in modern American history. The kind of event historians point to and say, this changed everything. Today, we're talking about the September 11th attacks, 9/11. The day nearly 3,000 people lost their lives, and the world, well, stopped acting like it used to. This is a story about ideology, about failure, about planning, and about consequences. But it's not a thriller you binge and put on a shelf. It's real people, real loss. So listen close. Sometimes history hits you so hard, it changes everything. And sometimes it's not just history. It's trauma that the whole world feels. What happened on September 11th, 2001 wasn't just another tragic day in the US. It was a day that rewrote how people saw safety, power, and even humanity itself. But before that morning, before those planes, before the smoke, before the silence that fell over New York, there was a story. A story that started years before 9/11 ever happened. This isn't just about terrorism. It's about how one man's rage, ideology, and twisted sense of justice ended up haunting the world. And how America, the most powerful country on earth, never saw it coming. Long before the towers fell, there was Osama bin Laden, a man born into wealth, power, and privilege in Saudi Arabia. He wasn't some poor guy from the desert trying to make a name for himself. Nah, man. He was a millionaire's son, educated, trained, and raised in luxury. But deep inside, he carried something darker, something boiling, something obsessive. As a young man, Osama got caught up in religion and politics at the same time. And that combo, especially in the Middle East during the 1970s and 80s, was like gasoline and fire. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, everything changed. To the world, it was just another Cold War battlefield, but to bin Laden, it was personal. He joined the Afghan resistance, the Mujahideen, fighting shoulder to shoulder with men who believed they were defending Islam from invaders. And guess who was helping fund that war? Yeah, America. The CIA was pouring money, weapons, and training into Afghan fighters, never realizing they were shaping the very people who'd one day turn against them. During those years, bin Laden's name started spreading among the fighters. He built camps, trained men, used his wealth to fund operations. He wasn't just fighting, he was building an army of believers. Men who thought dying for their cause wasn't death. It was victory. And that's where the roots of Al-Qaeda were planted. The word Al-Qaeda literally means the base. But it wasn't just a name, it was a system. A network of radical fighters scattered across the Middle East, connected by one goal: to bring down any power they believed was corrupting the Muslim world. And at the top of it all was Osama bin Laden, calm, calculating, but consumed by one idea: America had to pay. See, during the Afghan war, bin Laden saw something that burned inside him: American soldiers and influence spreading across Muslim lands. He believed they weren't there to help. They were there to dominate. He saw America as the new empire, rich, arrogant, godless. And he wanted to break it. When the Soviets finally pulled out of Afghanistan, the world celebrated. But for bin Laden, it wasn't over. He had found his calling, holy war. Now he needed a new enemy. And who better than the world's biggest superpower? In the early 1990s, bin Laden's focus turned completely toward the US. He started preaching against them, saying America was occupying Muslim lands and insulting Islam. and when American troops landed in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. Oh man, that was it. That was the breaking point. To him, Saudi Arabia was sacred ground, home of Mecca and Medina. And seeing U.S. soldiers stationed there was like seeing invaders in God's house. From that day, he swore he'd strike back. But here's the thing. At first, no one took him seriously. Even the Saudi government thought he was just another loud radical. They banished him, stripped his citizenship, and kicked him out. He moved to Sudan and started building his new empire of terror. By the mid-1990s, Al-Qaeda wasn't just a group. It was a full-blown organization. They had money, training camps, weapons, and loyalty from radicals across the globe. Bin Laden connected with other extremist groups, from Egypt to Pakistan, and slowly began forming his global jihad. He wasn't looking for small attacks. He wanted something spectacular, something the whole world would watch, something that would make America fall to its knees. And sadly, his journey was just getting started. While America was busy enjoying the economic boom of the 90s, with Hollywood shining, Wall Street climbing, and life feeling good, something darker was brewing in shadows thousands of miles away. Al-Qaeda was training men, young, educated, brainwashed, teaching them how to fly, how to kill, how to die, and every move, every message, every speech from Bin Laden carried one theme: America must suffer what we've suffered. In 1998, Al-Qaeda made its first major move. They bombed 2 U.S. embassies, one in Kenya and one in Tanzania. Over 200 people died, most of them innocent locals just going about their day. And for Bin Laden, that was victory. He watched the footage, the chaos, the global headlines, and smiled. America responded with airstrikes, but it barely scratched him. He survived, and that made him believe he was unstoppable. Then came the year 2000. A small boat, loaded with explosives, rammed into the side of the USS Cole. A U.S. Navy destroyer docked in Yemen. 17 American sailors died. Once again, Al-Qaeda. By now, they were on America's radar. But the problem? Different agencies had small pieces of the puzzle, but no one was putting the whole picture together. The FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies. They all knew something was brewing, but not what or where. Bin Laden was becoming America's most wanted man, but he wasn't hiding in a cave yet. He was planning. He was patient. He was about to strike harder than anyone could imagine. You see, to understand 9/11, you can't just jump to that morning. You have to understand the mindset. Bin Laden wanted to humiliate America, not just bomb a building. He wanted to hit symbols of wealth, power, and pride. And what better symbols than New York City's World Trade Center and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.? Those towers weren't just buildings. They were the face of American success. They stood tall, shining, unstoppable. And to men like Bin Laden, that was the ultimate target. So as the 90s came to an end, somewhere in the deserts of Afghanistan, a plan started to take shape. A plan that would take years to build, dozens of men to train, and the entire world to shock. And while Americans were waking up to coffee, traffic, and daily routines, while people filled planes, hugged their families, and went to work in those towers, no one, absolutely no one, knew that the countdown had already begun. By the end of the 1990s, while the world was chasing money, music, and technology, something deadly was forming in silence. In the deserts of Afghanistan, away from cameras, away from the spotlight, a network of men were preparing to pull off what they believed would be the most glorious attack in modern history. They weren't just soldiers. They were believers, brainwashed to think that killing was holy, that dying was freedom, and leading them, like a ghost pulling strings from the shadows, was Osama bin Laden. After escaping America's retaliation from the U.S. Embassy bombings and the USS Cole attack, bin Laden had learned one thing: if you want to break America, You don't fight it on the battlefield. You hit it where it never expects to be hit. At home. That idea, simple, terrifying, and genius in its evil, became the foundation of what would become 9/11. Bin Laden had just one goal: to make the United States bleed. Not through armies, not through tanks, through fear. He wanted the world to see that America could be brought down, that even the strongest nation on earth could be shaken to its knees by a handful of men with nothing but faith and fury. In the late 1990s, deep in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda's base camps were buzzing with life. Young men from across the Middle East were coming in. From Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Yemen, even Germany and the US. They weren't soldiers by training. They were students, engineers, dreamers who'd been turned into weapons by radical ideology. They trained in the deserts, climbed the mountains, learned to shoot, fight, and most importantly, obey without question. They were taught that America was evil, that every life lost in its destruction would earn them paradise. And under that belief, they became unstoppable. But bin Laden needed more than just passion. He needed precision. He needed minds that could carry out something never done before. Something so big, it would echo forever. That's when another name entered the story. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the so-called architect of 9/11. He was the brain behind the idea of using airplanes as missiles. Yeah, planes. The very symbol of freedom, progress, and connection. He wanted to turn them into weapons. He pitched the plan to bin Laden around 1996 or 1997. At first, it sounded insane. How could a few men hijack passenger planes and fly them straight into buildings in the middle of New York and Washington? But bin Laden, he didn't laugh. He listened. He saw the potential, and that's when the seeds of 9/11 were planted. The plan was simple in words, but complex in execution. Take 4 commercial jets. Each one would be hijacked by a small team of trained men. Each would have a pilot trained to fly it. 2 planes would hit the World Trade Center in New York. 1 would crash into the Pentagon. And the 4th, the most ambitious, would target the White House or the Capitol building. It was a suicide mission. None of them were coming back. And that's exactly what made it so dangerous. There was no escape plan, no way to negotiate, no going back. Now, to pull this off, they needed people who could blend in. Not typical-looking militants, but men who could pass through airports, rent cars, live in the US, and learn how to fly without raising suspicion. That's when Mohammed Atta entered the picture. Atta was an Egyptian student, intelligent, quiet, focused. He wasn't the kind of guy who looked like a killer, but inside, he carried the same radical fire that burned inside bin Laden. He became the leader of the hijackers, the man who would fly the first plane into the North Tower. Over the next few years, Atta and several others were handpicked by Al-Qaeda's top leaders. They were sent to training camps, where they learned not just combat, but discipline, mental, emotional, and spiritual. They were taught to forget their families, their fear, their past lives. Their only identity was soldier of God. By 1999, the final team was almost ready. There were 19 men in total, most from Saudi Arabia, some barely in their 20s. They didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't chase luxury. They were already living like ghosts, waiting for the day they'd vanish into history. One by one, they were sent to different countries, Germany, Malaysia, the UAE, to prepare for the next stage, learning how to fly. See, that's the part that made this plan almost impossible to predict. Nobody imagined a group of terrorists would actually learn how to pilot commercial aircraft just to crash them. It sounded insane, and that's exactly why it worked. In 2000 and early 2001, several of these men started arriving in the United States. They took flight lessons in Florida, Arizona, and Minnesota. They lived in small apartments, quiet neighborhoods, keeping to themselves. They went to flight schools, rented cars, even opened bank accounts. They looked like students. Nobody suspected a thing. Instructors would later say some of them only wanted to learn how to fly, not land. At the time, it seemed odd, maybe funny, but later, it would chill everyone to the bone. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda's communication lines were buzzing. Bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed monitored everything from Afghanistan. They made sure the hijackers had money, fake IDs, and clear instructions. They used coded messages, secret couriers, and encrypted emails. The plan was almost ready. They called it the plane operation, and every man involved knew exactly what he was dying for. But here's the haunting part. America had warnings. Yeah, that's right. Different intelligence reports from the CIA, FBI, and other agencies started surfacing, mentioning possible hijackings or attacks on U.S. soil. But nobody could connect the dots. There was no date, no clear location, no evidence strong enough to act on. To many, bin Laden was just another extremist hiding in mountains. They had no idea he was about to send a message the whole world would never forget. By mid-2001, everything was in motion. The hijackers were in place, scattered across different U.S. cities, blending in, waiting for the signal. They lived quiet, simple lives. They shopped at stores, went to restaurants, smiled at neighbors, but behind those calm faces, their countdown had already started. They practiced using flight simulators, studied cockpit layouts, memorized routes. They rehearsed every step, from takeoff to takeover. Every second was planned. And while they prepared for their mission, bin Laden sat in Afghanistan, confident. He'd spent years dreaming of this day, and now, it was almost here. August 2001, just 1 month before the attack, the hijackers were moving into final positions. Qaeda and his team traveled between cities, booking one-way tickets using fake names. They were calm, focused, emotionless. Some even visited nightclubs and bars in the final days. Not for fun, but maybe to blend in, to act normal. It was like they were ghosts playing humans one last time. Bin Laden recorded a video around this time. In it, he smiled. He spoke in riddles, blessing his men for what they were about to do. To him, this wasn't murder. It was divine justice. And while the world slept peacefully, while New York prepared for another bright morning, and while planes were being fueled for routine flights, a storm was forming. Let's pause for a second here. Imagine that 19 men walking among millions, carrying nothing but box cutters and blind faith, about to shake the planet. The intelligence community had fragments, reports of Middle Eastern men learning to fly, possible plane hijackings, bin Laden planning a major attack. But again, nobody could imagine this. The idea that someone would weaponize a passenger jet, it was too far-fetched, and that's what made it so deadly. In early September, the hijackers made their final calls home. They said goodbye without saying why. One message was simple. It's almost time. On the night of September 10, 2001, Qaeda and his team stayed in hotels near Boston. Receipts later showed they ordered dinner, watched TV, and prayed quietly. No sign of fear, no sign of hesitation. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, bin Laden's men prepared to record the aftermath. They knew once it began, the world would never be the same. That night, the city of New York slept like it always did. Buzzing lights, sirens in the distance, people laughing, dreaming, rushing through life. No one had a clue that within hours, those same streets would be covered in ash, smoke, and silence. Soft cinematic pause. Tomorrow morning, America would wake up to the most horrifying sight in its history. 4 planes, 19 men, and a world about to change forever. It was a Tuesday. A bright, calm morning, September 11th, 2001. A day that looked so peaceful, so ordinary, that nobody could have imagined what was coming. The sun had just started rising over New York City. The sky was perfect, Not a single cloud. People were on their way to work, grabbing coffee, catching trains, talking on phones. Flights were taking off like any other morning. Everything felt normal, and maybe that's what makes this story so haunting. How normal that morning started, and how fast it turned into hell. At 5:45 a.m., two men, Mohammed Atta and Abdulaziz Al-Amari, walked through the security gate at Portland International Jetport in Maine. They looked calm, polite, even friendly. They checked in, passed through security, smiled at the camera, and boarded a small connection flight to Boston. Nothing about them stood out. Nobody had a clue these two men were about to ignite the darkest chapter in modern history. Their connecting flight to Boston landed just before 7 a.m. From there, they made their way to Logan International Airport, where American Airlines Flight 11 was waiting, a Boeing 767, headed for Los Angeles. It had 92 people on board, passengers, pilots, flight attendants. None of them knew their plane was about to become a weapon. At 7:59 a.m., Flight 11 took off from Boston right on schedule. Just another morning flight heading west. A few minutes later, another plane, United Airlines Flight 175, took off from the same airport. Destination Los Angeles. On board, 65 people. At that exact same time, two more planes, American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington, D.C. and United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark, New Jersey, were preparing for takeoff. 4 planes, 4 crews, 4 flight paths that would cross into one horrifying story. By 8:14 a.m., controllers in Boston started noticing something odd. Flight 11 wasn't responding to radio calls. It had turned off its transponder, the device that tells air traffic control a plane's position and altitude. That was the first red flag. But nobody jumped to conclusions. At first, they thought it was a glitch, maybe a technical issue. No one thought, this is a hijacking. But on board, that's exactly what was happening. At around 8:15, 5 hijackers on Flight 11 made their move. They attacked the pilots, took control of the cockpit, and used knives and box cutters to control the passengers. They forced everyone to the back of the plane. Mohammed Atta, the same man we talked about earlier, was now in the captain's seat. He grabbed the radio and, in a chilling moment, tried to calm the passengers, but his voice accidentally went out over air traffic radio instead. He said, "We have some planes. Just stay quiet and everything will be okay." Those words. The first real signal that something unimaginable was happening. By 8:19, a flight attendant on Flight 11 managed to reach the airline's operations center. She reported that people had been stabbed, the cockpit was taken, and the plane was not under their control. America was still waking up. In New York, commuters were stepping out of subway stations, grabbing bagels, sipping coffee. Nobody knew that in the clear blue sky above them, death was heading their way. Fast. 4:46 a.m., the first plane hit. Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, between the 93rd and 99th floors. The explosion was massive. Fire burst out of the windows. Smoke, fire, glass, raining down on the streets below. People looked up in shock. Some thought it was an accident, a pilot error, a horrible, random crash. But deep down, something didn't feel right. News channels went live within minutes. Cameras zoomed in on the burning tower. Anchors speculated, asking, could this be a small plane? Maybe a commuter jet? Nobody said the word terrorism yet. Meanwhile, in the sky above New York, another plane was coming. United Airlines Flight 175, the second hijacked jet, was heading straight for Manhattan. It had been hijacked just minutes after the first one. Passengers were calling their families, whispering about men with knives, about people being killed. Some said they could see the World Trade Center from their windows, getting closer and closer. And then, at 9:03 a.m., live on television. The second plane hit. Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower at full speed. A fireball erupted across the skyline. Cameras caught it in real time. The world watched as that second explosion turned shock into horror. Now everyone knew. This wasn't an accident. This was war. The city froze. People screamed, cried, ran through the streets. Office workers from nearby buildings stood in disbelief. Phones stopped working. Emergency lines were jammed. At that moment, nobody knew how many more planes were out there. Nobody knew who was next. Inside the towers, thousands were trapped. Some were burned, some suffocated. Others called home one last time. You can still hear those recordings. People saying, "I love you. Tell my kids I love them. I don't think I'm getting out." It's the kind of pain that never leaves you once you've heard it. At 9:05 a.m., President George W. Bush was sitting in a classroom in Florida when his chief of staff leaned over and whispered, "A second plane hit the second tower." America is under attack. Those words changed history in that instant. Within minutes, fighter jets were scrambled. Air traffic control began grounding every flight across the U.S., and airports went into lockdown. But it was too late. The other two planes were already in the sky. 3:37 a.m. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, the heart of America's military. A massive explosion tore through the building. Flames engulfed the structure. Hundreds of people inside were killed instantly. Smoke billowed out over Washington, D.C. Now it wasn't just New York. It was the entire country under fire. And still, one more plane remained unaccounted for. That last one, United Airlines Flight 93, was heading toward Washington, D.C. But something different happened on that plane. The passengers fought back. They heard what had happened to the other flights through phone calls. They knew what was coming. So they decided, if they were going to die, they'd die fighting. Recordings later revealed what happened next. You could hear men shouting, rushing the cockpit, screaming, "Let's roll!" Moments later, at 10:03 a.m., the plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Everyone on board died, but their bravery stopped that plane from reaching the White House or the Capitol. They saved countless lives. Meanwhile, back in New York, both towers were burning, clouds of fire and smoke rising so high they could be seen for miles. People were jumping from windows, a sight too painful to even imagine. Firefighters, police, and rescuers were climbing the towers, running into danger as everyone else ran out. They didn't think twice. They just went in, hundreds of them, knowing they might not come back. And then, the unthinkable happened. 5:59 a.m. The South Tower began to collapse. Floor after floor gave way, one after another, until the entire building fell into a cloud of dust and debris. People on the ground screamed and ran. The air turned black. You couldn't see, couldn't breathe. It was chaos. And just when everyone thought it couldn't get worse, 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapsed too. The sound, the shockwave, the silence after. It's something that survivors say they'll never forget. For the next few hours, New York looked like a war zone. Ash covered the streets like snow. Sirens echoed everywhere. People wandered, covered in dust, crying, lost, calling names of loved ones they'd never see again. In the heart of the world's most powerful city, everything had stopped. Time itself froze. Thousands were dead, thousands more injured, and the nation, the whole world, was in shock. By noon, the news had spread across every country on the planet. TVs everywhere played the same footage. The towers falling, people running, firefighters covered in ash. The world was watching America break. President Bush was taken to Air Force One for safety. Every military base was on high alert. Flights across the globe were grounded. And yet, in that chaos, something else happened. Something powerful. People came together. Strangers helped strangers. Firefighters hugged civilians. Doctors worked until they collapsed. America was bleeding, but it was standing. That night, New York burned. The skyline that once defined the city was gone. 2 empty holes where the towers once stood. But the spirit of the people who lived there, that didn't die. People lit candles, hung flags, prayed in silence. The world mourned with them. Every major city held vigils, and for the first time in a long time, everyone, everywhere, felt the same heartbreak. When you look back at that day, it's hard to believe how much happened in just a few hours. From 8:46 a.m. to 10:28 a.m., less than 2 hours, the entire world changed. It wasn't just buildings that fell, it was the sense of safety, the illusion of control, the idea that something like this could never happen here, but it did. And those who saw it, those who lived through it, will never forget. Soft cinematic closing tone. That morning started with sunlight and laughter, and ended in smoke and silence. It showed how fragile life is, how fast everything can disappear, and how hate, when left unchecked, can destroy more than just buildings. But what came next would reshape the world forever. Because in the ashes of 9/11, America would rise, angry, wounded, but determined. And soon, the hunt for revenge would begin, the morning of September 11th, 2001. It started out like any other regular day in America. The sun rose over the East Coast, the air was clear, the sky was an endless blue, almost too perfect. People were heading to work, kids were getting ready for school, Wall Street was waking up, and New York City, that restless, sleepless heart of the country, was already buzzing with life. No one had any clue that in just a few minutes, the entire rhythm of the world was about to change. At 8:46 a.m., a roar split the calm of lower Manhattan. Out of that bright morning sky, American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The sound was unreal, like thunder that didn't belong to the sky. The impact tore through the building, sending fire, glass, and smoke bursting into the air. For a second, nobody really understood what had happened. People looked up, pointing, confused. Some thought it was an accident, a plane gone off course. But as the smoke thickened and fire raged from the upper floors, something deep inside everyone began to twist. Something didn't feel right. News channels cut into their regular broadcasts. Cameras zoomed in on that massive black hole in the side of the tower. Reporters spoke in shaky voices, trying to piece together the chaos. "It appears a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center," they said. But even as they spoke those words, another story was already unfolding high above the clouds. At 9:03 a.m., just 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 came slicing through the sky, fast, low, deliberate, and crashed straight into the South Tower. The explosion was massive. Fireballs erupted out of the windows. Smoke shot upward like a dark storm cloud. And right there, in that horrifying instant, America realized this wasn't an accident. This was an attack. People on the streets screamed, cried, ran. Some froze where they stood, staring up in disbelief. The world watched live as 2 of the tallest buildings on Earth burned against a crystal blue sky. Every TV, every radio, every heart was locked on New York City. Inside the towers, chaos and courage mixed together in ways words can barely describe. Thousands were trapped. Floors above the impact zones where the stairwells were destroyed. Firefighters, cops, and paramedics rushed toward the buildings while everyone else ran away. That's the kind of bravery you can't script. Men and women in uniform, running into fire, knowing they might never come out. One firefighter was heard saying over his radio, "We're going up. Don't worry about us." Those words still echo through time. At 9:37 a.m., another jet, American Airlines Flight 77, slammed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The heart of America's defense was on fire. Smoke billowed over the Capitol. By now, everyone knew the United States was under attack. Nobody knew how many planes were still in the air or where they might be heading. Airports were grounded. The military scrambled jets. The president, George W. Bush, was in Florida at the time, reading to a classroom of kids. His aide leaned over and whispered the words that froze the world. A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. Inside the towers, people were doing everything they could to survive. Some made desperate phone calls to their families. Others helped strangers down the stairs, carrying those who couldn't walk. Above the crash zones, the air was thick with smoke and heat. People broke windows, waving for help that couldn't reach them. Some made the unthinkable choice, jumping from the towers to escape the flames. Those images would haunt the world forever. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. The sound of it wasn't just a building falling. It was like the earth itself groaned. A wall of dust and debris rushed through the streets like a hurricane. People ran, covered in ash, barely able to breathe. Reporters screamed on live TV, their voices cracking as the skyline changed before their eyes. "The tower has collapsed. The tower has collapsed," they said, over and over, as if trying to convince themselves it was real. In the middle of that chaos, something else was happening over the skies of Pennsylvania. United Flight 93, the fourth hijacked plane, was heading toward Washington. But the passengers on board had learned what was happening in New York and the Pentagon. They knew this was a suicide mission, and they decided to fight back. You can hear their courage in the black box recordings, people rushing the cockpit, shouting, breaking down the door. One voice, clear and determined, said the words that became a symbol of defiance. "Let's roll." Minutes later, the plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing everyone on board, but saving countless lives in Washington. Back in New York, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower, the first one hit, collapsed. It came down like a controlled demolition, floor by floor, in a matter of seconds. The smoke swallowed everything. The sound was beyond words. The Twin Towers, icons of America's power and progress, were gone. The streets of Manhattan looked like a war zone. Dust covered everything, cars, buildings, people, like gray snow. Sirens screamed from every direction. Firefighters dug through rubble with their bare hands, searching for survivors. Some had lost their whole teams. One survivor later said, "It was like the world ended, and we were the only ones left." By noon, Lower Manhattan was a graveyard of steel and smoke. The air smelled of burning jet fuel and dust. People wandered in shock, trying to call loved ones, but the phone lines were dead. Across the country, airports were empty, skies were silent. The United States, the most powerful nation on Earth, was paralyzed. News anchors struggled to hold back tears. One reporter whispered on air, "This is like something out of hell." Around the world, people watched, horrified. In London, Paris, Tokyo, everywhere, the same question echoed. Who could do this? By evening, the magnitude of it all began to sink in. Thousands were missing. Families were gathered around TVs, clinging to hope that maybe, just maybe, their loved ones were still alive under the rubble. Photos of the missing began appearing on walls and fences around Ground Zero. Faces of moms, dads, brothers, sisters, children. It was heartbreaking. Firefighters kept working through the night, using whatever they could find: buckets, flashlights, even their hands. The smoke rose from the ruins for days, and as night fell over New York, a silence settled in, the kind that cuts through your bones. That day, September 11th, became more than just a date. It became a scar burned deep into the soul of a nation. The fear, the loss, the confusion, it was overwhelming. But even in that darkness, there was something else: unity. People helping strangers, offering water, holding each other. The country, broken but unbowed, started to pull itself together. President Bush addressed the nation that night, his voice steady but heavy. "None of us will ever forget this day," he said. "Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world." The world had changed. The skyline of New York had changed. The way people looked at the sky had changed. Nothing felt safe anymore. But among the ashes, Stories of bravery and sacrifice began to emerge. Firefighters who carried people out until their last breath, office workers who refused to leave without their co-workers, passengers who gave their lives to stop another attack. The morning that started with sunlight ended in darkness. But from that darkness, a new kind of strength was born. America had taken the hardest hit in its history, and now the world waited to see what would come next. When the smoke finally began to clear over Ground Zero, the world was left standing in stunned silence. The skyline of New York, once crowned by those twin towers, now looked like an open wound. For days, smoke and ash rose like ghosts from the ruins. The streets were quiet except for the constant hum of rescue trucks, the cries of sirens, and the faint voices of rescuers calling out, "Can anyone hear me?" America was in mourning, raw, angry, and broken. Nearly 3,000 lives gone in a single day. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. And that message had hit the heart of the most powerful nation on earth. But America doesn't stay down for long. Beneath the grief, something else was building. Determination. The hunt had begun. President George W. Bush addressed the nation, his voice steady, but his eyes burning with resolve. He stood at Ground Zero a few days later, surrounded by firefighters and rescue workers still digging through rubble. The air was thick with dust, the ground still warm from the fires that hadn't gone out. Someone shouted, "We can't hear you!" Bush grabbed a bullhorn and climbed onto the debris, and in that moment, his voice echoed through history. "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." That line hit every American heart like a battle cry. Behind the scenes, the CIA, FBI, and every intelligence agency in the world were racing to find answers. Who exactly had done this? Who was behind the hijackings? The world soon learned the name that would become synonymous with terror. Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden, the tall, quiet figure with the long beard, wasn't some random extremist. He was the leader of Al-Qaeda, a global terrorist network with roots stretching back to the Soviet-Afghan War. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't a small operation. It was years in the making. Money, training, fake passports, communication systems, all carefully built under the world's radar. Inside the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, agents were working 24/7. They identified the 19 hijackers, most of them Saudi nationals, trained in flight schools right inside the United States. That fact alone hit Americans hard. The enemy had been among them, quietly learning, planning, and waiting. At the Pentagon, war rooms buzzed with tension. Maps of the Middle East covered the walls. The mission was clear: find Osama bin Laden, dismantle Al-Qaeda, and destroy anyone who gave them shelter. Just weeks after 9/11, on October 7, 2001, America made its move. The operation had a name: Enduring Freedom. The United States and its allies began airstrikes on Afghanistan, where the Taliban government was harboring bin Laden and his followers. The first explosions lit up the Afghan night sky like firecrackers in hell. Cruise missiles launched from Navy ships. Stealth bombers roared overhead. Within hours, Al-Qaeda camps and Taliban strongholds were reduced to rubble. The war on terror had officially begun. Back home, fear still lingered. Airports turned into high-security zones. Bags were checked, shoes removed, ID cards scanned. The Department of Homeland Security was created. For the first time, America realized the enemy wasn't just on foreign soil. It could be anywhere, hiding in plain sight. New York, though wounded, refused to give in. People carried candles through the streets. Murals and memorials appeared on every corner. The faces of firefighters and victims became symbols of courage. Never forget wasn't just a phrase, it was a promise. But the war was far from simple. The mountains of Afghanistan were rugged, treacherous, perfect hiding grounds for Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden vanished like a ghost, slipping through caves and borders. American troops landed, hunted, fought, and died in a country where the terrain itself was an enemy. Journalists embedded with soldiers sent back stories that gripped the world, tales of bravery, loss, and confusion. No one really knew how deep this war would go or how long it would last. For many, it started to feel like a fight without an end. Meanwhile, Washington pushed for answers. Intelligence officers combed through every clue: satellite images, intercepted calls, names scribbled on scraps of paper. The CIA found a network of operatives stretching from Pakistan to Yemen, from Germany to the Philippines. Al-Qaeda wasn't just an organization, it was a movement, and America's response was massive. The Patriot Act was passed, giving law enforcement sweeping powers to track and stop potential terrorists. Some said it was necessary. Others said it was the beginning of losing privacy in the name of safety. But at that time, fear outweighed debate. Everyone wanted protection. In Afghanistan, U.S. Special Forces worked side by side with the Northern Alliance, local fighters who hated the Taliban. Within weeks, Kabul fell. The Taliban regime crumbled fast. But still, bin Laden was nowhere to be found. He was always one step ahead, hidden in the shadows. One by one, key Al-Qaeda leaders were captured or killed. Each victory felt big, but hollow. Because the man behind 9/11, the face on every wanted poster, was still out there. Back in America, the emotional impact of 9/11 continued to ripple through daily life. Families were still searching for remains. First responders who had breathed in the toxic dust at Ground Zero were starting to fall sick. Children were growing up without parents. The pain didn't fade, it just changed shape. In the years that followed, America invaded Iraq in 2003, under the belief that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and ties to terrorism. That war, though separate, became tangled with the 9/11 aftermath. The lines blurred. The fight that began with justice started to look more like vengeance. At the same time, Al-Qaeda evolved. It inspired new groups in North Africa, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. The US and its allies were chasing shadows across the globe. The war that began in response to one day's horror had turned into a global struggle that would last decades. But through it all, one mission stayed the same: find Osama bin Laden. The CIA called it the hunt. Entire departments were dedicated to tracing his every move. For years, he was invisible. No confirmed sightings, no communications, nothing. Some even began to wonder if he was still alive. By the late 2000s, the war had dragged on longer than anyone expected. Thousands of soldiers had died, billions of dollars spent. The American public was tired, but deep inside the intelligence community, something was shifting. The puzzle pieces were finally coming together. A mysterious courier had been tracked, someone close to bin Laden. The trail led to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The compound was heavily guarded, surrounded by high walls, barbed wire, and no phone or internet connections. Something about it didn't fit the profile of a normal home. The CIA watched, waited, and analyzed every movement. Was this it? After nearly a decade of searching, had they finally found the man who started it all? That's where the next chapter begins. The night the world's most wanted man came face to face with justice. It had been almost 10 years since that dark September morning. 10 years of searching, of chasing shadows across mountains and deserts. The United States had poured everything into one goal: finding Osama bin Laden, the man who had orchestrated the 9/11 attacks and turned the world upside down. By 2010, many people had started to believe he was already dead, maybe hiding in some remote cave, maybe buried under the rubble of some forgotten battlefield. But deep inside the CIA's counterterrorism center, a few agents refused to give up. They believed he was still out there, breathing, planning, and laughing at the world from the dark. And then, a small piece of intel changed everything. A man known only by his code name, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, popped up on their radar. He was believed to be a trusted courier for Al-Qaeda, someone who carried messages directly between bin Laden and his commanders. The CIA had been hearing his name for years, but they never knew where he was. Now, finally, they had a lead. They tracked him through phone intercepts, through whispers picked up from informants, through movements that didn't add up. Every small clue led them closer. And in August 2010, the trail ended in an unexpected place: Abbottabad, Pakistan. Abbottabad wasn't some remote desert hideout or mountain village. It was a bustling city, home to Pakistan's military academy, a few hours' drive from Islamabad, the capital. In the middle of that city stood a large, mysterious compound, surrounded by 16-foot walls, topped with barbed wire, no phone lines, no internet, and residents who never threw out their trash. Everything about that house screamed suspicious. CIA agents watched the compound from a rented house nearby. For months, they observed. They noticed a man who never stepped outside, a tall figure who walked the yard late at night. No one saw his face clearly, but the way the guards treated him told a story. They called him the Pacer. Could it be him? The CIA analysts debated for months. There was no photograph, no absolute proof, just patterns, shadows, and instincts. But every piece fit. Director Leon Panetta briefed President Obama. "We believe Osama bin Laden is in that compound." Obama listened carefully. The evidence was strong but not solid. The risk was massive. If they were wrong, it could destroy trust with Pakistan and make America look reckless on the world stage. But if they were right, this could be the moment the world had been waiting for. The president ordered a top-secret operation to be planned, one that only a handful of people would even know about. The mission would be led by SEAL Team 6, the most elite special operations unit in the world. These were men who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Every detail was rehearsed, from the height of the compound's walls to the layout of the rooms. A full-scale mock-up of the house was built at a secret base in North Carolina. The SEALs practiced over and over how to enter, how to clear each floor, how to handle surprises. Every second counted. Then came the night. May 1st, 2011. 2 stealth Black Hawk helicopters lifted off from Jalalabad, Afghanistan, carrying the SEALs into the dark. The mission was codenamed Operation Neptune Spear. They flew low, hugging the ground to avoid radar, cutting through the night with nothing but determination and silence. Inside those helicopters, the team barely spoke. Everyone knew what was at stake. They weren't just going after a man. They were carrying the weight of every soul lost on 9/11. After about 90 minutes, they reached Abbottabad. The city below was asleep. The compound came into view, that high-walled fortress standing still under the moonlight. And then, disaster almost struck. One of the helicopters hit an air pocket and crashed inside the compound. It didn't explode, but it was down. Instantly, the team switched to backup plans, just like they'd practiced. The other helicopter landed outside, and the SEALs stormed the walls with controlled precision. "Move, move, move," voices whispered through comms. Silencers clicked, boots hit dirt, doors were blown open. Dogs barked. Women screamed. The entire operation was chaos, but controlled chaos. Within minutes, they had secured the ground floor. The team climbed the stairs, clearing each level, exchanging gunfire with a few of bin Laden's guards. On the 3rd floor, behind a bedroom door, it finally ended. When the SEALs entered, they found Osama bin Laden standing in the dark, his youngest wife shielding him. The order was clear: capture if possible, eliminate if necessary. A single shot cracked through the silence. Then another. Bin Laden fell. The man who had haunted the world for a decade was gone. The SEALs quickly confirmed the identity, taking photographs, DNA samples, everything needed to prove the mission's success. They gathered computers, hard drives, and documents filled with Al-Qaeda plans, a goldmine of intelligence. Then they loaded back into the helicopters. The crashed Black Hawk was destroyed on site to keep its technology secret. In less than 40 minutes, it was over. As the team flew back across the Afghan border, President Obama and his national security team were watching from the Situation Room, eyes locked on a live feed, hearts pounding. When the words finally came through, Geronimo y Qaeda, meaning enemy killed in action, the room erupted in relief. After nearly 10 years, justice had been served. The news broke around the world late that night. President Obama appeared on live television and said the words millions had waited to hear. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and the terrorist responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. Outside the White House, people gathered in the streets. They waved flags, sang the national anthem, chanted, USA, USA! The same streets that had once been filled with fear and grief were now filled with tears of joy and relief. In New York, at Ground Zero, people lit candles and left flowers at the memorial. Firefighters stood in silence, their eyes glistening with emotion. It didn't bring back the lives lost, but it brought closure, a sense that the nightmare had finally reached its end. Across the world, reactions were mixed. Some called it justice, others called it vengeance, but for America, it was a moment of healing. Bin Laden's body was taken to an aircraft carrier, where it was identified once more, and then buried at sea in accordance with Islamic tradition. No grave, no monument, nothing that could become a shrine, just the deep, endless ocean. In the years that followed, the world continued to change. The war on terror didn't simply end. New threats rose, new conflicts began. But the death of bin Laden marked a turning point. It showed that no matter how long it takes, justice can find its way, even to the darkest corners of the earth. For the families who lost loved ones on 9/11, the pain never disappeared. But that night, when the news spread that the man behind it all was gone, many felt something they hadn't felt in years: peace. The world looked back at that decade, from the blue skies of 2001 to the quiet night in Abbottabad, and realized how much had changed. It was a story of tragedy and courage, of hate and hope, of loss and redemption. Ground Zero was rebuilt, not with the same towers, but with something even stronger: the One World Trade Center, a symbol of resilience, rising higher than before. The world will never forget that morning, or the day it ended. Because history isn't just written in wars or politics, it's written in moments, in the faces of heroes, in the cries of survivors, in the silence that follows when justice finally speaks. That's the story of 9/11, a story that began with fire and ended with the echo of a single word whispered across the night sky: justice.